चित्रा महोदयायै धन्यवादाः। सरलेन संस्कृतेन अत्र तत्र आङ्ग्लभाषां च सम्मिश्र्य किञ्चित् वक्तव्यम् इति अहम् आदिष्टोऽस्मि। अहं तथा करिष्ये, परन्तु प्रायेण आधिक्येन अहम् आङ्ग्लभाषामेव प्रयुञ्जे। तत्र कारणं सर्वेषामपि अर्थबोधः अक्लिष्टं भवेत् इति। अन्यथा तु अर्थबोधो न भवति चेत् केवलं संस्कृतस्य श्रवणमात्रमेव भवति, तेन न तावत् प्रयोजनं। तस्मात् अहम् अत्र तत्र आङ्ग्लमपि प्रयोक्ष्ये। So today I will be talking to you about Chitra Kavya. So maybe I'll keep asking you a couple of questions, some polls at while I talk, just so that I get a sense for what you're thinking. So if you have heard of Chitra Kavya, can you put your hand up? Okay, so nobody has heard of Chitra Kavya. Na kaischit shrutam Chitra Kavyam kimiti. Kavyam kim iti tu shrutam iti manye. Everybody knows what is Kavya. So Chitra Kavya is a kind of Kavya. It is a kind of poetry, but it is a special kind of poetry. It is a poetry written with constraints. So Chitra Kavyam nama sanirbandham rachitam kavyam. It's a poetry that's written putting extra constraints on top of the constraints we already have. You know that in Sanskrit, there is already the constraint of the meter. You have to write poems in certain classical meters. So there are already constraints. But on top of that, you put some more constraints, and you create poems that are quite astonishing. So Chamatkari Kavyam, Chitra Kavyam. So Chitra here means something that's Vismayakari, something that's Adbhuta. That is Chitra Kavya. Now, ayam vishayaha katham maya prastotavyaha. How should I present this? There are several paths that I can take. So I can start by quoting all of the ancient authors who have written on this and give you the definition of Chitra Kavya. Chitra Kavyasya kati prabhedaha, tasya prabhedasya ke prabhedas santi. Ityadikam tu bhavati eva sarvatra grantheshupi upalabhyata eva. Param tena na mahat prayojanamiti manye. So there is not much point in giving you lots of definitions and telling you what the ancient authors thought of Chitra Kavya. So the way that we will approach this today is going to be like a guided gallery tour. So I will not give you any definitions of Chitra Kavya or any categorizations which the ancients were so fond of doing, but we will go through examples of Chitra Kavya, maybe 2000 examples, and you will see the sorts of things that they have made. So think of it as a walk through a Chitrashala, a painting gallery, and you will get to see many wondrous things. And then maybe you can go back and you can read more about this, or I'm happy to chat after I'm done if you're interested to know more technical things. So evam idanim arabhamahe. किंचित प्रदर्शयामि. दृश्यते ननु? दृश्यते. साधु. तो अत्र मंगलाचरणेन आरम्भः इति संप्रदायः. तस्मात् इदं मंगलाचरणं पद्यं मयैव विरचितं. So I wrote this Chitra Kavya. And we will start with this Chitra Kavya, which is our Mangalacharana. So if you look at this, maybe you have already guessed what the constraint here is, what the pattern is. Arati ratano rattanari tanuranuttaraha tantanitu trinetro nirartitamno nirantaram. So this is a padya yatra kevalam rakaraha takaraha nakaraha च भवन्ति. अन्यत् न किञ्चित् अस्ति. त्रयमेव. अस्य अयमर्थः. अरातिः अतनोः कामारिः कामस्य अरिः Shiva, who is the enemy of the love god. Attanari tanuhu, Shiva, who shares his body with Parvati as Ardhanarishvaraha. May he grant us good health. Nirartitam, always. Nirantaram. Tantanitu. May he extend our good health. And you can see that this only uses 3 consonants. And so this is roughly what a Chitra Kavya is. But you can have so many different constraints. Nirbandhaha bahudha vidyante. Sarvamapi Chitra Kavyam ityeva katyate. Bhavadbhirapi kanchana nutanam nirbandham nirmaya nutanam Chitra Kavyam nirmatum shakyam. Tatra na kopi kleshaha. Idanim bahuni Chitra Kavyani vayam pashyamah tatrasthan nirbandhancha. So अत्र तु भवद्भिर्दृष्टमेव तत्र रकारमात्रं तकारमात्रं नकारमात्रं अन्यदेकम् अत्र प्रदर्शयामि यत्र केवलं तकारः रकारश्च एतत् वल्लभदेवस्य सुभाषितावल्याम् इदं स्थितं तारतारतरैरेतैर् उत्तरोत्तरतो ऋतैः रतार्ता तित्तिरीरौति तीरे तीरे तरौ तरौ तित्तिरिः नाम कश्चन पक्षी तित्तिरिः इति स पक्षी तित्तिरिः उत्तरोत्तरतो ऋतैः नाम शब्दैः रौति शब्दं करोति कुत्र तरौ तरौ वृक्षे वृक्षे अपि च तीरे तीरे नद्याः तीरे तीरे अस्मिन् तीरे तस्मिन् तीरे सर्वत्र कस्मात् स रतार्ता भवति लव्सिक् तस्मात् एवं स तीरे तीरे तरौ तरौ रौति शब्दं करोति केवलम् अत्र तकारश्च अपि च रकारश्च द्वयमेव भवति अत्र किञ्चित् विचिन्तनीयम् अस्ति so why has the poet started using ta and ra and why did I choose to use ra ta and na to write this? So obviously it is not a random choice. So there is some thought that has gone behind this. So if you take a look at the frequencies of consonants that are there in Sanskrit, I've marked the consonants that are most frequent. So you can see that, for instance, ra is extremely frequent in Sanskrit. In fact, it's the most frequent consonant. Tadanantaram makaraha, nakaraha, sakaraha, kakaraha, yakaraha, ete sarvepi. Tasmat yada kavayah एवं एकाक्षर श्लोकम द्व्यक्षर श्लोकम त्र्यक्षर श्लोकम वा लिखन्ति तदा एतानेव ते प्रयुञ्जते. If I attempt to write such a verse using tha or dha or gha or ta, it's simply not going to work out because those consonants are not that plentiful in Sanskrit. So there's quite a lot of background thinking that goes behind choosing how to write these verses, how do you construct them, and even with all of this calculation, it's still a hard challenge. It's not easy to write things like this. Now Sanskrit takes this art form to heights unknown in other languages, but we also see this from time to time in other languages. And atra tatra aham anyasu bhashasu kani chitra kavyani santi iti pradarshayishyami. So atra pashyata atra angle sthitam kanchana asti. Atra kevalam o ekameva vowel bhavati. Kenachit etad virachitam. Angla bhashayam anyasu bhashachu cha idrushanam kavyanam parampara asti eva param alpiyasa pramanena. So there is the tradition of writing lipograms, so where you avoid using certain letters. So Ernest Wright wrote this book called The Gatsby, where the entire book, 5,000 words, it does not have a single E. And you can see what a difficult feat it is, because that's actually the most frequent vowel in English. But he manages to write it in such a way that it's actually comprehensible and quite nice to read, and actually have some nice turns of phrases. Now in Sanskrit too, you find something like this used in a very interesting way in the Dashakumara Charita. So Kavyam etat Dashakumara Charitam nama दण्डिना विलिखितं सा क्वचित् दक्षिणभारते प्रायः इदानीं यत् तमिळ्नाडु इति कथ्यते द्राविडदेशे स आसीत् तेन दशकुमारचरितम् इति गद्यकाव्यं किञ्चन विलिखितम् अत्यन्तं मनोहरं तत्र तत्र दश कुमाराणां कथाः वर्ण्यन्ते so there are the stories of 10 young men and each young man narrates his story himself so there is one young man called Mantragupta who has kissed his lover so much that his lips are all chapped so he can no longer touch his lips together rather he doesn't want to so Mantragupta's entire story Dandi writes without using the letters pa pha ba bha ma ते वर्णाः न भवन्ति एव तस्यां कथायां तत्र सा कथा अपि चित्रकाव्यमेव एतत् तु सुप्रसिद्धमेव मन्त्रगुप्तस्य कथा परं विदुषामपि अज्ञातं किञ्चन अन्योपि अंशः वर्तते तदत्र कथयिष्यामि so this is something that even scholars very few scholars know So there is another work called the Avanti Sundari Kathasara, which is a summary of another work written by Dandi. And we see another thing here where a character called Somadatta, he is afflicted by fever, he is very weak, can barely speak. So he only speaks using the gentle 24 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. The rest he leaves out. So kha, pha, cha, gha, all of that he does not use. So there's another constraint there. Now, the interesting thing is that these 24 letters that are the gentle letters, as the author says, Swaraihi Mrudubhihi, those are actually exactly corresponding to the Tamil alphabet. Those are the same letters in the Tamil alphabet. So, Dandin being from Tamil Nadu, maybe he was actually, while writing in Sanskrit, he was using the Tamil alphabet, alluding to the Tamil alphabet in his Chitrakavya. So यदा यदा मनसि प्रश्नाः प्रस्फुरन्ति तदा तदैव chat box मध्ये प्रेष्यन्ताम् अहं पश्यामि उत्तरीतुं च प्रयतिष्ये. So if you have any questions before you forget, just drop them in the chat box and we can come back to it. I will keep checking anyway. So another interesting Chitrakavya is this. So you might all know of the sentence, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. It contains all the letters of the English alphabet. Quite popular, especially if you've done some kind of coding or computer science, you've definitely seen it in some puzzles. Now, there was a scholar called Manavalli Gangadhara Shastri, Kashi Nivasi. Sa kadachit shatavadhanam chakara. अत्र भवतां अवधानकला परिचिता स्यात् तत्रापि समस्या इति भवति समस्या so in short he was given this line बभौ मयूरो लवशेष सिंहः he was given this one line and he has to complete the other 3 lines no pen no paper on the spot in front of an assembly of scholars. Now you can see that in this line, all of the words are actually in the order in which they appear in the Sanskrit alphabet. Ba, bha, ma, yara, lava, sha, sha, saha. So there, babhau, mayuro, lava, shesha, simha. It's in that order. So what does this mean? Now the challenge here is Gangadhara Shastri has to complete this by providing 3 lines, which are also in the Sanskrit alphabetical order. And so this is the constraint. You write a verse where all of the letters in the Sanskrit alphabet occur in that order. And we hear that Manavalli Gangadhara Shastri actually did it. Tena padyam etat virachitameva. Atra drashtum shaknuvanti bhavantah. Aneka varna kramariti yuktaha. Kakha gaghang cha jajhang tathaudhaha. Adandhanas Thotha dadhauna pampul babhau mayuro lavashesha simha. You can see that ka, kha, ga, gha, all of the letters are in that order. And he did this spontaneously, we hear. So this is another kind of Chitra Kavya, which involves Varna Chitra, the way letters are arranged, the way letters are either forbidden or preferentially allowed. We know of some other verses like this in which all of the Sanskrit letters appear in the order of the alphabet. So another example of this sort is present in Bhoja's Saraswati Kanthavarna. So upon seeing these kinds of verses, you must also ask the question, what do these verses actually mean? Do they actually mean anything at all? Of course, the first line is somewhat clear, Aneka Varna Kramari iti yuktaha. But beyond that, the only few words that we can identify are Dadhau, Babhau, and Mayuro. Apart from that, everything else is a haze. So we'll come back to this question later. How do we know what the Chitra Kavya means? Are there people who can actually understand Chitra Kavya? How do we understand it? We'll come back to this. So another interesting form of Chitra Kavya is called Gudha Chaturtha Pada, the hidden fourth line. So this is from the famous Mahakavya, Kirata Arjuniya, one of the 5 Pancha Mahakavyas in Sanskrit, which everybody reads. Now the interesting thing here is that the fourth line has to be made of the letters that have already been used in the first 3 lines. So in some sense, the fourth line is already contained in the first 3 lines. So you can see that va, dyu, ta, ma, va, sam, ti, all of them are there in the first 3 lines. This something like this could be given as for extemporaneous composition in Avadhana. So you say, give me a Gudha Chaturtha Pada verse, and you have to write something like this. So coming back again to the theme of seeing what other cultures have been doing things like this, there has been quite a large movement called Oulipo in France, which mostly populated by mathematicians and writers, called Workshop of Potential Literature, which has been trying a lot of these experiments in French and English and European languages, and they have produced quite a lot of interesting and amazing stuff. So you should go check some of it out. So they have produced quite a lot of Varna Chitras. So for instance, they've written huge poems, which if you rearrange, you get new poems. You write an entire novel without using E, and then you translate that into English. You write that in French, and then you translate that into English again without using the letter E. So these kinds of literary experiments, they've done quite a lot of, and the motivation for them really is that it's only if you constrain your writing you can understand the true potential of literature, what language can really make us do. And this is also what Chitra Kavya really tells us. Yadi nirbandha sthapyante tadaiva jnayate भाषा कीदृशी भवति भाषया किं कर्तुं शक्यते इति, अन्यथा तु तद् न ज्ञायते एव. इदानीं वयं विलोमकाव्यं पश्यामः, यद् आङ्ग्लभाषया पैलिण्ड्रोम् इति कथ्यते. भवद्भिर्तु आङ्ग्लभाषायां अत्र तत्र तु दृष्टानि एव सन्ति विलोमवाक्यानि इति मन्ये, परन्तु अन्यासु भाषासु अपि दृश्यन्ते एव. विलोमकाव्यं न प्रायेण, परन्तु विलोमवाक्यानि तु दृश्यन्ते. सो अत्र प्राचीन यवनभाषायां एतत् स्थितम् अस्ति, यद् भवत्पुरतः अस्ति. सो निप्सॉन अनुमे माता मे मोनान ऑप्सिन इति. एतत् इस्तान्बुल् मध्ये हागिया सोफिया इति यत् पूर्वं क्रैस्तमन्दिरम् आसीत्, इदानीं यवनमन्दिरं सञ्जातं, तत्र पुरतः एतद् अस्ति. So there's a fountain there which has this. So this is a palindrome. You can see in the Greek letters that if you read it this way or you read it that way, either way it reads the same. This doesn't work if you transcribe it, transliterate it into English, or you write it in some other script unique to the Greek script. And this is true of palindromes throughout, across languages, script dependent. But what this means is that wash the sins, not only the face. So you go to that fountain to wash your face, and then you read this saying, wash the sins and not only the face. So you can also find such similar palindromes in Latin. Atra ingirum imus nocte ecce et consumimur igni. Atra we go atra patangam adhikritya etat, moth. So we go round and round in the night and are consumed by fire. So moth to the flame. That's the idea. This too is a palindrome. Param Sanskrita bhashayam विलोमकाव्यपरम्परा एव अन्यादृशी वर्तते न तत्र केवलं वाक्यानि समस्तानि काव्यानि एव विलोमरीत्या लिख्यन्ते. So in Sanskrit, a palindrome would be called a viloma kavya. So loma means hair. So viloma means going against the hair, literally. It's something analogous to what we say in English as going against the grain. So in the opposite direction, viloma going against the grain. And anuloma is in the forward direction, along the grain. So you can see that this is in front of you is a verse from Devi Shataka. Devi Shatakam Anandavardhanena virachitam. Mahan ayam alankarikaha swasmin alankara granthe saeva chitrakavyam adhamakavyam akathayat. Swayameva chitrakavyam cha vyalikhat. So Anandavardhana, who was one of the great alankarikas, literary scholars of Sanskrit, he said that Chitrakavya is adhama poetry, the worst kind of poetry. But then he himself wrote a Chitrakavya as well. So this is from that. It's called Devi Shataka. It's in praise of Devi. So you can see here that you can read either from this end to that end, or you can read from that end to that end. And it reads the same. So sa bhava from this end, and then sa bhava from that end. So each line is a palindrome. I'm not going to tell you what this means because it will take too long, but it's interesting that you can actually write such elaborate things in alunoma, pratiloma, viloma fashion. Tatra asmabhihi vilomakavyam drushtam. Idanim we will turn up the nirbandha notch more. Atra nirbandhasya kaఠिन्यम adhikam bhavati. Etat Ramakrishna vilomakavyam iti kathyate. Atra tambhusuta mukti mudarahasam vande yato bhavya bhavam dayashrihi. Atra anuloma ritya yadi pathyate ayam artha bhavati. Yad adhasthitah. I pray to Rama ityadikam. Parantu, you can also read this in the backwards fashion. So you can read this as Shri Yadava Bhavya, so on. And you will get another line which is in praise of Krishna. So you read this forwards. Anulomam pathyate tada Ramastutir bhavati. Yadi vilomam pathyate tada Krishnastutir bhavati. Api na kevalam ekam padyam kavyametat tatra bahuni padyani idrishani sthitani. This is quite amazing as well. Tra anyat kathaniyam etat sarvato bhadram iti. Smita Mahodaya, kati nimeshaah gataah?
Itopi sadagatta asti Mahodaya. Another 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes.
Okay. So etat sarvato bhadram iti kathyate. So we saw two kinds of palindromes. One where you can read from this way and that way, and it gives you the same meaning. And we also saw one where from Ramakrishna Vilomakavyam, where if you read the other way, it gives you a different meaning. So one way, the meaning of it praises Rama, the other way it praises Krishna. So this is perhaps the most complex kind of palindrome possible. That sarvato bhadram iti kathyate. So guarded from all sides. A lot of these kinds of things ultimately come from military formations. And in fact, they are also used in Kavya in the context of Yuddha Varnana. So Yuddha Varnaneshu Mahakavyeshu Tatra Chitra Kavyani Chitra Bandhaha Vishishya Prayujyante. So Maghasya Kavyeva, Bharaveh Kavyeva, Yuddha Varnane ईदृशाः बन्धाः सर्वतो भद्रं वा चक्रबन्धो वा अथवा गोमूत्रिका वा सर्वेपि तत्र युद्धवर्णने एव भवन्ति। इदानीम् अत्र पश्यन्तु भवन्तः अत्र देवाकानिनि कावादे वाहिका स्वस्व काहिवा काकारे बभरे काका निस्वभव्यव्य भस्वनि इति अस्ति। So I take this verse and I put it into a grid, the sort that you can see on your left hand side, that grid. Just put the same words into a grid. And what I'll do now is that imagine there is a mirror at the bottom. So this verse gets reflected. So I'm going to add that mirror now. So I've just reflected those 4 lines using a mirror. So you get this grid of 8 cross 8, 8 cross 8 grid. So अत्र इदानीं पश्यन्तु यदि येन यया कयापि दिशा यदि पठ्यते तदैव लभ्यते पद्यम्। अत्र यदि वामभागे आरभ्य दक्षिणभागपर्यन्तं गम्यते देवाकानिनि कावादे इत्येव भवति वाहिका स्वस्व। यदि उपरि आरभ्य अधो गम्यते तदापि देवाकानिनि कावादे देवाकानिनि कावादे। यदि दक्षिणभागे आरभ्य वामभागं प्रति गम्यते तदापि देवाकानिनि कावादे। अत्र दक्षिणभागे उपरि आरभ्यते चेदपि देवाकानिनि कावादे तदेव लभ्यते। तस्मात् यया कयापि रीत्या अत्र पाठः शक्यते। एतदेव सर्वतो भद्रम् इति कथ्यते। So this is, you can read this in whichever form you want. It's like a magic square. So when it this way, this way, this way, this way, every way you will get the same verse. A very advanced kind of palindrome. So for this is something very special to Sanskrit. It's really difficult to do these kinds of things in other languages. So there's something known as the sator square in Latin, which is found in a lot of places. Vishishya yat Pampanagaram yat kathyate na asmakam Karnataka deshe sthitam Pampanagaram param Italy deshe sthitam Pompe iti yadasti tatra idamasti अन्यत्रापि वर्तते परं प्राचीनतमं प्रायस्तत्रैव अस्ति। अत्र एतदपि सर्वतो भद्रप्रायमेव. So you can see these sator, arepo, tenet, opera, rotas iti. Roughly it means the farmer arepo has works, wheels iti. Param spashto arthah na bhavati, parantu sarvato bhadrasyapi spashto arthah na bhavati. So once a famous Chitra Kavi once told me the difficulty is not in writing the Sarvato Bhadra. So yani kanyapya aksharaणि संगृह्य तत्र कथञ्चित् स्थापनीयान्येव तदनन्तरं कथं व्याख्यातव्यम् इत्येव समस्या भवति। लेखने न समस्या, व्याख्याने समस्या. So you place the letters first and then you have to think about how do I explain what this means. Then you have to bring out the whole Sanskrit grammatical apparatus, Panini's heavy artillery, and try to explain what these things mean. Okay. So we will see something else. This is perhaps the most popular Chitra Kavya in Sanskrit, probably the most easy to execute, which is why it's so popular. So we are all familiar with end rhymes, which is so common in English poetry, also in modern Indian poetry. But end rhymes don't exist in Sanskrit, so nobody performs end rhyme in Sanskrit. But there are these things called extended rhymes. So instead of rhyming the last 1 or 2 syllables, you rhyme entire phrases. So you can see at the end here that me duritam, they repeat. it's not the same word. There are two different words. This is me and duritam. This is me duritam. And here you can see charu chiram, charu chiram. They're different words, but they're repeating. So it's like an extended rhyme. So when you hear this, you can actually hear the rhyme. Sometimes you may need some sort of familiarity with these concepts to actually hear it, but I'll recite it now. Prashithilayatu me duritam pranamadamara mauli kusuma me duritam arunotpala charuchiram padayugamishasya nigama vacharuchiram. So you can hear the me duritam charuchiram twice. So this is a arya verse, arya meter. So this is actually written by a contemporary poet who lives in Bangalore, Shankar Rajaraman, who's one of the great Chitra Kavis of our age. The meaning of Chitra Kavya generally tends to be something fairly simple or prosaic. So maybe something praising a god or describing a certain season or describing something stock like a lotus or war, the spring season, all topics that are quite common in Sanskrit poetry. And the reason simply is that because the constraints are so severe, it's hard to take on more challenging topics to write on. So you choose topics that are fairly well established and that they have a lot of vocabulary attached to them. So you can weave your way across these constraints. Atra yamakalankarah संस्कृते भवति अत्र तत्र क्वचित् आङ्ग्लभाषायाम् अपि श्रूयते अन्यासु भाषासु अपि श्रूयते अत्र अस्यां जिमी हेण्ड्रिक्स् गीते किस् द गाय किस् दिस् गाय किस् द स्काई किस् दिस् गाय इति यमकः श्रूयते गाने एवं केषुचित् स्थलेषु काव्येषु अपि एवं सम् ऑर्डियल इति श्रूयेत परन्तु यमकस्य परंपरा न विद्यते संस्कृतेतरासु भाषासु संस्कृत प्रभावितासु भाषासु विद्यते एव कर्नाटक भाषायां वा तेलुगु भाषायां वा हिंदी भाषायां वा गुजराती भाषायां वा तत्र सर्वत्रापि न केवलं यमक परंपरा चित्रकाव्य परंपरा एव विद्यते सर्वैः एतैः बन्धैः यमकैः अलङ्कारैश्च सम्पूर्ण संस्कृते यद्यत् स्थितं प्रायस्तत् सर्वमपि तासु भाषासु अपि स्थितमेव. In fact, it's not just in these Indian languages that all of these things have been imported into. Even in East Asia, for instance, in Java, where Sanskrit poetry was extremely influential. So the Javanese Ramayana, which is written in Kakavan style, that actually has yamakas. It's modeled on the Sanskrit Bhatti Kavya. So you can see yamakas in the Javanese Ramayana. And there are also these kinds of chitrabandhas in Tibet. Nobody has written anything about them. I know they exist, but vidbhadbhihi tan prayaha na adyavadhi parishilitam. So atra asmabhihi idrushah yamakah drishtaha. We saw a yamaka where 4 letters repeat. So we can take that up a notch further. You can see this is a yamaka where the entire 2 lines repeat. So the first half and the second half of the verse are the same. Tamaku patram Rajendra bhaja magnana dayakam. Tamaku patram Rajendra bhaja magnana dayakam. So this is not a copy pasting error. Atra evam eva bhavati kavye. Prathamardham dvitiyardham cha samameva. Atra ko arthah asya tarhi tat pashyamah idani. So prathamam, O king, do not meditate upon ignorance causing tobacco. Tam aku patram. Tamaku patram. So tamaku hunama tobacco iti. Tobacco, tamaku. So tamaku patram Rajendra bhajama agnyana dayakam. So do not, O king, atra maya anuvade doshah krutah, atra prathamam bhaja nama meditate iti na. It means consume. Atra bhaja nama consume iti. Satvaram maya tatra doshena tankitam. Tatra, hey Rajan, hey Rajendra, O king, tam akhu patram. ma bhaja ajnanadayakam. So don't consume tobacco, which causes ignorance. Instead, tam akhupatram Rajendra bhaja magna. Instead, you meditate upon Ganesha, Akhupatra, who gives you Dayakam, both Ma is Lakshmi, wealth and knowledge, Jnana. So by splitting words in different ways, you get two meanings. But you can even take this up a notch further, and you can have 4 lines, all with the same line, which you have to divide differently to get different meanings. This is in the same famous Kavya, Kiratarjuniya, which you've seen before, one of the 5 great Mahakavyas. Vikashamiyur Jagatisha Marganaha, Vikashamiyur Jagatisha Marganaha, Vikashamiyur Jagatisha Marganaha, Vikashamiyur Jagatisha Marganaha. Tarhi atra katham karaniyah samasa vichedah. Atra tesham eva shabdanam भिन्नार्थाः भवन्ति. प्रथमं मार्गणाः नाम शराः इति, एरोस्, अथवा मार्गणाः नाम मार् प्लस् गणाः, गणाः नाम शिवस्य गणाः इति, अथवा विकाशं नाम ते सर्वत्र क्षिप्ताः अभवन् चराः इति, अथवा विकाशं नाम ते सन्तोषं गतवन्तः इति. एवं बहुधा अर्थाः कल्प्यन्ते. So we'll come to another interesting aspect. So while I was living in the UK, very close to my house, just a 5-minute walk away, there was this very interesting bench. This photo is not taken by me, but I've often gone and sat on this bench. So you can see that this bench has what appears to be a Latin inscription on it. It says, Ore stabit fortis arare placet ore stat. Appears to be Latin. So you can imagine that some first-year Latin student, classic student in Oxford University might have gone there and spent an hour thinking, what could this possibly mean? What does this Latin inscription mean? And come away unsuccessfully, because it doesn't seem to mean anything. So because Latin and Sanskrit are quite closely related, you can give a sort of a gloss. Atra chaya rupena संस्कृत पदानि लेखितुं शक्यन्ते. तर्हि अत्र पश्यन्तु भवन्तः, मुखात् स्थास्यति शक्तिः क्रष्टुं रोचते मुखात् तिष्ठति इति अस्य अर्थः. पदशः अयम् अनुवादो भवति. तर्हि कोऽस्य अर्थः? मुखात् स्थास्यति शक्तिः क्रष्टुं रोचते मुखात् तिष्ठति इति. तस्य न कोऽपि अर्थः स्फुरति. तत्र कारणमेतत् नैतत् लतीना भाषायां भाषया विलिखितम् एतत्तु आङ्ग्लभाषायामेव निबद्धम्. सो ओ रेस्ट अ बिट फॉर इट इज अ रेयर प्लेस टू रेस्ट एट इति अस्य अर्थः. केवलं तत्र पदविच्छेदः साधुकरणीयः एव, तावदेव. तत्र केवलं विदुषां दुर्विदग्धानां विच्छित्तये तेषां गर्भखण्डनाय एव विरचितम् एतत् आसनं. भवतु नाम. सो अत्र एतत् संस्कृतभाषायां भाषाभासः इति कथ्यते, गिविंग द इम्प्रेशन ऑफ अ डिफरेंट लैंग्वेज. भाषाभासः इति. एवं पश्यता तत् संस्कृतेन निबद्धं भाषाभासपद्यम्. एतदपि कविवरेण शङ्करेण विलिखितं, बेङ्गलूरुनगरवास्तव्येन साम्प्रतिकेन. गोविंद वार्धवे यूनो मैत्री संसारवेशिका रमासरो बालार्कोसि हरीशोसूनवेद्धरम् इति. संस्कृते अस्य अयम् अर्थो भवति. ओ कृष्ण, ओ लॉर्ड इत्यादिकं किञ्चन कृष्णप्रार्थना तद्भवतु नाम. परन्तु Ayam Angleena nibaddhamiva shruyate. Go, win the war the way you know. My 3 sons are away shikar. Amasa robe, all are cozy. Hurry, so soon await the rum. Iti. एतानि सर्वाणि पदानि तु आङ्ग्लकोशे भवत्येव. शिखर् इति पदमपि आङ्ग्लकोशे भवति एव. भारतीय भाषाभ्यः आनीतम्. प्रायः आङ्ग्लसंस्कृतभाषाभासः ईषद् दुर्गमः, दुरवगम्यः. यतोहि आङ्ग्लभाषायां संस्कृतभाषायां च न समानानि अक्षराणि भवन्ति. तस्मात् अत्र तु वेट् इति अस्ति, परन्तु आङ्ग्लभाषायां मूर्धन्याक्षराणि retroflexes एव न सन्ति. English does not have retroflexes. So, and the vowels in English are not the same as in Sanskrit. But it is possible to write these kinds of verses between Sanskrit and Indian languages, which are remarkably close to the Indian language. I don't have any examples here, but I know of several examples from Kannada to Sanskrit. I'm sure you can find for other languages as well. So you can, so idam अन्यदेकम् उदाहरणम् एतत् पद्यम् ईषद् भिन्नं. तद् भाषा समं पद्यम् इति कथ्यते. भाषा समं चित्रकाव्यम्. अत्र युगपत् भाषाद्वयम्. पद्यमेतत् लैटिन् भाषयापि निबद्धम्, इटालियन् भाषयापि निबद्धं वर्तते. अर्थस्तु समान एव, एक एव अर्थः, परन्तु उभयथापि पठितुं शक्यम्. So this is only possible because Italian derives from Latin. So they have cleverly not used those forms which change as Latin evolves into Italian. So when Latin changes into Italian, the feminine forms remains the same. So that's why it's directed towards some particular queen, regina, and so on. So by cleverly choosing your topic and the forms you want to use, you can do these kinds of things. Now in Sanskrit, this takes the form of writing bhasha samapadyas between Sanskrit and Prakrit. So Prakrit is an intermediate classical language that came between Sanskrit and the languages that we have today. So it too was a classical language used quite widely in India. And we have lots of important and well-read works that are written in Prakrit. So now this very interesting Mahakavya called Kappinabhyudaya, written in Kashmir by Shivaswamy, has one chapter which can be read in both Sanskrit and Prakrit. But the interesting thing here is that it's not just the same meaning, both in Sanskrit and Prakrit, like we saw in Latin and Italian. You actually get two different meanings. So the chapter 19 is written as in praise of the Buddha. So you can read this in Sanskrit. So if you divide this one way, you get the Sanskrit reading, and that will be in praise of Buddha. And if you divide the words up in a different way, then it's a Prakrit verse, and you get a different meaning. So this is actually one of the unresolved challenges in the field. This was completely unknown that this chapter has this amazing feature, and a scholar called Mikkel Hahn realized this some years ago, and they're still trying to figure out exactly how each verse is to be divided to get meanings for both Sanskrit and Prakrit. And the last I heard, they found a manuscript preserved in China that has a commentary on this. So we may finally be coming close to cracking what these verses mean. Atra anyat chitrakavyam turagapada patha iti. If any of you, I'm sure there must be somebody in this group here who has done computer science or maybe wants to do computer science. And you may have heard either in computer science or in mathematics of something called the Knight's Tour, which is a challenge where you start on a chessboard, where you're given a chessboard and you have a knight, And the challenge is to traverse the entire chessboard using that knight. You have to visit every square only once and then come back to where you started from. And this was only solved quite late in medieval Europe. Now the interesting thing is that we have Chitra Kavya which solves a smaller version of this problem, not the one with 64 squares, but with a smaller version. And this is framed as a Chitra Kavya problem. And this was done quite long ago, at least maybe the 9th century, but even many times after that. So this particular verse I'm showing you is from Paduka Sahasra by the famous Vedanta Deshika, scholar, poet, and teacher of the Sri Vaishnava school. So this was Sthiragasam Sadaradhya Vihitakata Tamata Satpaduke Sarasama Rangaraja Padam Naya. Now, if you write this as a matrix, just put every syllable into one of the boxes. And you imagine that's like a chessboard of sorts. And you start from the first box and you take a knight, a turaga, a horse, and you make it move around. You can actually do this till you have completely traversed this entire grid, visiting every box that's there. And every time you visit a new box, you write down what letter you get. So then you'll get a new verse. So you start with sthi, you move to ta, then you go to sa. Your knight's moving that way. So you'll get a new verse. Sthita samaya rajat pa gatara madake gavi duramhasam sannatada sadhya tapa karasara. So you get another verse, which is also in praise of Rama's footwear, Rama's sandals. So you can take this verse, you can do the Turagapada Pata, the night store on this, and it will give you another verse. And this verse is also in the Paduka Sahasra, which was written by Vedanta Deshika. So so you might have heard of Donald Knuth, the great computer scientist, sometimes called the father of algorithm analysis, the creator of LaTeX. And he was so impressed by seeing, he's very interested in graph theory. So he went into the history of this and he found this night store being solved already in Sanskrit literature on a small scale in the 9th century in Paduka Sahasra, in Hara Vijaya, many other kavyas. So he wrote some of these kinds of poems in English himself. So you can see that what's on the screen is a Turagapada Patha written in English by Donald Knuth. So you can do this similar Turagapada Patha and get one from the other here. So we are almost coming to the end of what I have to say. So this is something called as the Chakrabandha. So atra tu etat padyam prathamam pashyata tatosau sharvani charanamurasin nyasya nakasya shatrau tame nanka jyotir ghatita makuta nignati vepamanam shunasira shlagha vachana mudita daitya daurbalya duti babhau asya chaya vijita mukura shrihi sudhandhav parita. So this looks like a perfectly normal verse. In fact, it's the final verse of the Devi Danaviya, written by Shankar Rajaram. It narrates the story of how Devi killed Mahishasura. Now, the interesting thing is, if you take these lines, you take these 4 lines and you arrange them in the form of a wheel, with every line being a spoke, then you can find a hidden message in here. So you can see there's some marked letters. So this is it reads, if you read in a clockwise direction, that actually reads Shankarasya Kaver Bandha. This is the bandha, or this is the image, the Chitra image that has been composed by the poet Shankara. So you can think of it as a sort of an anti-plagiarism measure. So if somebody reprints this Kavya and says that actually it was not Shankar, it was Suhas who composed it, Shankar can always go back and show that in the last line I've actually encoded my name into it. It has to be mine. So this is quite commonly seen. You see this in a lot of kavyas, where in the final verse, the work concludes with a chakrabandha, in which the poet's name is somehow cleverly encoded, or some other message is cleverly encoded. So I'm in the process of writing a book, which should be out next year, and in fact, in the last verse, I have I'm writing a Chitra bandha of this Chakra bandha of this sort, with some hidden message. So this is my final slide. This is perhaps the most extreme example of Chitrakavya that I have seen. This is called Krishnamurti's Kankana Bandha Ramayana. And this is truly extraordinary in what it tries to accomplish. So this is an entire Kavya narrating the story of the Ramayana, but it's just one verse. So it's just one verse, but it has the equivalent of 64 verses in it. Asyam ekasyam kavitayam ekasmin asmin shloke चतुष्षष्टि श्लोकाः स्थिताः सन्ति. कथम एतत् साधितम्? So the way that this works is that you can generate 64 verses from this one verse. So you so you can see that this is, I've written this as a kankana, as a bracelet. So you take one of the beads, you start reading from there. So maybe you can start with the topmost name, you read, you get one verse. Now you move one letter ahead, you start from ta, you read again, you get the second verse. You move one more position forward, read again, you get the third verse. So in this way, you can move 32 places and do rotations and get 32 verses. Then you repeat the same thing reading anti-clockwise. So you get 32 more. So you can get 64 verses. And Krishnamurti's claim is that this gives you the story of the Ramayana. Okay. So now we come to the end. We come to the Upasamhara. So now at the very start, I had brought up the point of how do you really read Chitrakavya? The question of how to write Chitrakavya is a complex one. We won't go into that now, but how do you read it? These things seem so hazy. They seem so strange. Are there people who can actually understand this? It's a real question to ask. So the answer to this is that Chitrakavya often works on the basis of using Sanskrit as an analytical constructed language rather than a real language. So when you're trying to do these sorts of complex acrobatics, you start leaning heavily on the tools that Panini gives us, that Sanskrit grammar has. You start making all kinds of constructions that you would not normally see in understandable language. So it becomes more like a sort of code cracking, where you have to analyze what pratyaya is present in these words, in how many ways can I understand it. And it is in fact true that given something like the Kankana Bandha Ramayana, there may not be exactly one way of understanding it. Every commentator, every reader can come up with their own way of understanding it, because there's just so many possibilities. And I can in fact write a commentary tomorrow possibly saying it's not really Kankana Bandha Ramayana, it's the Kankana Bandha Mahabharata. And I could possibly use all the techniques that Panini gives us and explain it to you. And nobody can argue with me, because if it works, it works. So often Chitrakavya is presented as being possible because Sanskrit has some kind of a divine origin or an incredible structure that allows this to happen where other languages don't permit it. But the real fact is that this is not a feat of language. This is a feat that is enabled by grammarians. So atra Chitrakavya यदि चित्रकाव्यं रचयितुम् इच्छो जनः तत्र न स्वर्गे स्थिताः संस्कृतभाषिणो देवाः शरण्याः न वा कवयो शरण्याः वैयाकरणाः एव शरण्याः. So the Sanskrit makes Chitrakavya possible because it has such a robust tradition of grammatical analysis where you can take words, analyze them very precisely, understand how words are formed, what are the building blocks that allow us to construct words, construct phrases. And if we started doing this for English tomorrow or for French with such depth, then we could also write Chitrakavya in these languages. And indeed people do, but it sounds more absurd in these languages because that tradition does not exist. So before I conclude, there's a very valid question to ask: what do I do now? Of what use is Chitrakavya? One answer to this is that you can just enjoy this and you can go away and never think of it again, which is fine because there are many uses of Kavya, and one of the uses is just enjoyment, as the old authors admit. But there are also things you can do. So there are many open problems in Chitrakavya, like I mentioned, that we still don't know how to understand the Samskrita, Prakrita, Bhasha, Shlesha in Kapinabhyudaya. So maybe one of you 10 years down the line will work on that problem, figure it out, edit some manuscripts. If some of you are doing something else full time, you can do other things. There are lots of programmers who build tools for Sanskrit. So you can build tools so that we can visualize these Chitrakavya in a nice way. So everything that I showed you today is very badly visualized, screenshotted from various books and sources. But I'm sure there are some of you who can do a great job of writing code that can produce visualizations. There's lots of work happening on the technology front with Sanskrit. We need to write libraries to sort of analyze old kavyas, parse language, maybe identify Chitrakavyas that we don't know exist within these kavyas. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and whatever skill set you have, there are ways in which you can bring it into Sanskrit, into Chitrakavya, and help and enjoy yourself. So that's all I had to say. I'll be happy to take any questions. Dhanyavadah. संस्कृतेन भवतु, आङ्ग्लेन भवतु, यया कयापि भाषया भवतु, यद्यहम् अवगमिष्यामि अवश्यम् उत्तरीतुं प्रयतिष्ये.
महोदय, एकः प्रश्नः अस्ति.